Welcome, everybody, to the PyMC Labs webinar. I'm your host, Thomas Wiecki, and today I'm joined with Corey Abshire and Will Dean. Corey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Thomas. Hi, everyone. I'm Corey Abshire. I'm a specialist solutions architect at Databricks. Been here for about 2.5 years. And yeah, before Databricks, I was a principal machine learning engineer at a large manufacturing firm, and it was there that I got kind of introduced to Bayesian statistics and became a big fan of PyMC and that sort of stuff. And then whenever I joined Databricks, got into MMMs, and then became a fan of PyMC-Marketing. So happy to talk to everyone and talk a little bit about how you can run PyMC-Marketing on Databricks.
Great. And Will?
Hey everybody, Will Dean, data scientist, working with PyMC Labs and one of the maintainers of PyMC Marketing. I have a similar story where I used PyMC a bunch, big fan, and then as PyMC Marketing developed, got involved there and brought me to where I am now. So working a lot with MMMs, working a lot with getting them in deployment. So working with some of that tooling there and trying to help better that for everyone.
Great. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And I'm really excited about today's webinar because the whole angle of productionizing is something that hasn't really been, I guess, talked about and worked a lot in the past for PyMC, I guess, more generally, but PyMC marketing as well. And while we, I think, do a really good job of offering just the tooling to run very advanced MMM models in open source software, uh, of course, once you're happy with those results, you want to take those to production, right? And rerun them daily, have data input like this. It's part, the model is part of a much larger orchestration. And there have been a few pieces that had to be put in place. One of them is MLFlow integration, which Will Dean has worked on and we'll talk about a little bit. But then, of course, there's the whole infrastructure side of it. And this is where, for quite some time now, actually, we've partnered with Databricks and Corey specifically in how you can run PyMC marketing on Databricks and just have the whole thing be extremely smooth and easy to set up to where you have something that's just very strong and automated and definitely rivals the paid for solutions out there integrated on an open source stack. So I think that's really powerful and takes that to the next level. And I'm very excited to have Corey talk about how easy it is now to actually run these models and um, and how to look at results and all those things. So thanks and give it away, Corey.
Awesome. Thanks, Thomas. So I'll just share my screen. Do have some slides just to give kind of an overview, and then we'll jump into some demo stuff between Will and myself. So yeah, just a little bit about Databricks. I won't go into this slide in detail, but some of the main things, if you're not familiar with us, that are relevant for like productionizing an MMM model is some open source contributions in particular that we're uh, creators of and maintainers of, especially Apache Spark for like bringing in all your data and running it at scale. MLFlow, like Thomas mentioned, is a great tool for like managing your model training processes and your productionization of models. And then Delta Lake, like being able to have all your data in one place in like a lakehouse sort of mode is super important. And then Unity Catalog. So, you know, a big part of governing all the data that would drive like MMM models and other sort of marketing analytics models relies on that sort of, you know, security and governance sort of functionality. So those are some of the main things that I think Databricks can help bring to the table. The way we sort of think about Databricks is as a data intelligence platform. So that open source software that I mentioned sort of forms this core of these sort of different pillars of capabilities that we bring to the table. And each of these really is relevant in different ways to both MMM, but then, more generally, running like a marketing analytics shop at a company. Um, this AI platform is where we would think about like all the data science and machine learning, including like PyMC-Marketing. So this is where that would fit in, especially with like data science notebooks, MLflow, that sort of stuff. Um, Being able to like, run marketing analytics doesn't just involve the MMM models, of course. You also just want your standard analytics and dashboards for what does my marketing spend look like? What does my revenue look like over time? So being able to productionize not only those in dashboards, but how do you actually feed those dashboards with like upstream data? And then also like how do you drive all of that functionality? That's where workflows and DLT comes in. So that's where you can like orchestrate all those different data pipelines and combine them with models like PyMC-Marketing models and budget optimization models and forecasting models. So MMM is growing rapidly. I did want to leave this slide in here, even though I suspect that a lot of the audience is already familiar with MMM and doesn't need a pitch for that. The thing that I would say about it is just to give some context for MMM on Databricks. Over the last year or so, since I started working with it, actually, I guess it's been almost 2 years now. Um, the level of interest in MMM across the entire industry has been huge. Um, I tend to focus more on like communications, media, entertainment customers. But when it comes to MMM, it's like I get exposure to all industries. So there are a lot of media and entertainment customers who are doing a lot with MMM. There's also a ton of retail and consumer goods customers who are doing a lot with MMM. And I've kind of seen the gamut from different sorts of deployments that people are doing, different ways that people have gone to production. And I think there's a lot of value to be gained for companies to actually pursue MMM, especially these days. But there are a lot of challenges that I've seen teams run into, especially when they're not having their MMM on Databricks yet. Like Thomas mentioned, like getting to production is non-trivial for MMM. Like you can go do like an example notebook, and all those materials are fantastic. And like following a Bayesian workflow, you can get a model up and running and have like a generated data set that you're testing your model against and make a lot of progress like that. But at the end of the day, you really want to run that model against your data. And whenever you're talking about MMM, what does that look like? Well, that's, all these different data sources, right? So you're trying to pull in data from, let's say, Facebook APIs or Snapchat APIs, all these different sort of online digital marketing tools, pulling from those APIs. And then also, like, one of the powerful things about MMM is that you can combine it with out-of-home advertising. So, well, that's another data source that you have to incorporate. And not to mention all the other data sources that you could potentially bring to bear for like control variables and things like that. If you wanted to incorporate like a weather related variable, how do you pull in all that weather data? And beyond just one time, right? You want to have it pulled in if you want to run your model daily or weekly, well, you've got to pull in fresh data daily or weekly. So that's a big challenge for teams. I've talked to some teams, they're happy, like their goal is to like run the MMM model like once every 6 months. And that's sort of like where they're at today is like we can update our model once every 6 months. Well, like it's great to be able to run it once every 6 months, but are you getting like, the insights that you need into your organization to really, have a data-driven marketing analytics if that's as often as you can run your model? The other thing is like MMM, because it tends to span multiple teams, we can see a lot of teams having like challenges with silos within their org. So you've got like, the marketing team is one set of individuals who are maybe working closely together, but then a lot of times I'll see like they're sort of trying to partner up with like a data science team. And the data science team is going to be helping them build their models and stuff like that, but they don't maybe have as much background in marketing and they're often a disconnected team. So how do you bring those different teams together? How do you get them working on the same data set, in the same tool set, that sort of thing? And then, the data science team also often isn't responsible for all those upstream data sources that we're talking about, right? It's typically going to be a separate data engineering team that's pulling that data in. And sometimes multiple different data engineering teams. You may have one data engineering team that's pulling in all the lower level sort of signal that you would get from your main web production infrastructure, another team who's pulling in things from all those different APIs that we mentioned. So having silos is definitely a common thing that we've seen with customers, especially before they're getting into like the platform. Um, and then modeling and DSML ops. So there's sort of two aspects of this. One is that I've observed that a lot of data science teams who are getting into MMM, they're maybe not as familiar with Bayesian workflows and setting up like Bayesian models. They may have a lot more familiarity with like scikit-learn and pandas and the whole NumPy sort of based data science stack, but they may not be as familiar with how do you set up a Bayesian model, right? So that's a big challenge for folks is like how do you get started with MMM, and then especially how do you get started with MMM in like a Bayesian context, and especially like how do you extend your model? Like part of the advantage of building your own model is you want to be able to extend it and customize it to your specific use case. So that can be a challenge for folks. And then like once you have your model, how do you actually get that model into production? So those are all challenges that I've seen a lot from folks. I want to mention those just as like motivation for why do I think it's helpful to run like MMM models with PyMC-Marketing specifically on Databricks. So Databricks helps a lot with like those upstream and downstream pipelines. Like how do you bring in all that marketing data into one place that you can share like across all your different teams? Um, Databricks really helps streamline those workflows, and I've got some other specific capabilities that I'll walk through later that talks a little bit about specifically how we help there. Um, Unifying that end-to-end model development lifecycle. So basically, like anything that you would need to do as far as like feature prep and running all the different models that would feed into the MMM model. Um, Downstream to like any forecasts that you're going to run from this, any sort of budget optimization models. You can run all that basically in the same platform with the same set of orchestration tools. You don't need like to pull together this set of like 20 different technologies just to run your MMM model. And then lastly is the efficiency gain. So, being able to run all this stuff on one platform, in particular, being able to run PyMC-Marketing, right? So PyMC-Marketing kind of gives you already out of the box, like a way to easily create a sophisticated Bayesian model with a lot of nice modeling techniques already incorporated and debugged with like a strong community behind it. So with just a few lines of code, you can have like a sophisticated MMM model up and running quickly. And yeah, you'll see an example of that in a little bit. Um, this is like a high level picture, just to get you thinking about like what does an end-to-end stack look like. So whenever we think about PyMC-Marketing, that fits sort of here in the middle, like in the whole model training and inferencing process, and actually creating your getting your posteriors, pushing out like a posterior predictive. All that happens kind of here in the middle. But you can see there's a lot of other things that whenever you think about what does MMM really need to be productionized, this kind of sets that in context for what an architecture on Databricks would look like for MMM. So I'll kind of walk through this a little bit because I think it's helpful to like set the context for productionization. So upstream, you're going to have like all these different data sources, right? I mentioned some of them earlier. Some of the common ones would be like, Meta sort of APIs with Facebook. There's tons of other ones, right? LinkedIn, AdWords, Snapchat, YouTube. I won't read through all these. And then also all of your different traditional offline media. So just a ton of different sources kind of starts up here on the left. Then how do you ingest all that stuff, right? So you're probably going to have some combination of APIs that you're triggering. You could either trigger those APIs directly if you're writing those custom sort of API integrations, or we have partnerships with like Fivetran and different sort of companies that let you point to a specific account and say, I want to pull in like all my data from this account and I want to have it scheduled on a regular basis. That's going to land all this data into this bronze layer, right? So this is like the first part of productionization. How do we get all this different marketing data into the platform? Silver is where we say like, okay, we need to like cleanse and normalize that data. So that's going to be like these data engineering pipelines. So like whenever you look at an MMM example, both on like the Databricks Solution Accelerator and like the MMM example on PyMC-Marketing, it sort of starts from this gold layer, which is like, okay, I've got this aggregated data set that basically has, spend by channel and revenue on like, say, a weekly basis, right? And then maybe you have some other grouping variables like a brand or a geo or something like that. But upstream from that, like what does it look like? Well, all that data in like a production context doesn't just sort of like magically appear, right? You have to go through this process of like cleansing that data, normalizing it, putting all your channels, like how do you even label your channels so that whenever you go to create that gold table, you have like a consistent view? How do you like make sure that your definition of like what ad spend looks like and revenue looks like is consistent across all those different sources that you're going to be pulling together, potentially across multiple business units, multiple orgs, things like that. Um, and then how do you just, land all that data in somewhere that everybody can work on it in like a cost-effective way, right? So that's where Databricks comes to the table with like Delta Lake, and we basically let you run all those different data engineering pipelines and data storage just on cloud storage. So like all the data is just this open format cloud storage that sits on whatever cloud you're on. And then all these data engineering pipelines basically take you through that process of going through bronze, silver, and gold. Once you've got it in gold, that's where you can kick off like your PyMC marketing model and then kick out like, budget optimization runs or forecasting runs. And then what you can do from there is whenever you push out those predictions and push out those forecasts, you can push those back into other gold tables and then serve those in like a data warehousing product, so Databricks SQL, right? So then whenever your marketing analysts want to say, okay, what is the actual, contribution breakdown across channels look like? What does my aggregate sort of like ROAS look like across all these different channels? They can just like select that from a table that you push out from your model in gold at that point, right? So then they can either use like a built-in sort of dashboarding functionality or push that into like other external analytics tools. You can also like, and I've seen this with a lot of customers, you can build self-service tools where people can go like, build themselves like a little notebook or like a job running interface where they can put in different parameters for like running a budget optimization run based on the latest inference run, and then do like a self-serve sort of simulation type of thing, right? So that's very common ask from customers, and I've helped a lot of customers set that type of environment up. So that's another sort of thing that you would see like on the right side here. And then also sharing those insights with like agencies and things like that. So we have tools like Delta sharing and clean rooms that lets you bring multiple different parties together, which is very common in like, marketing analytics in particular, right? You're typically going to be talking to like your agency and different sorts of brands that you're interacting with. How do you bring all those different folks together in one place? So this is kind of the high level architecture. Um, Another thing, like drilling down a little bit, I won't spend too much time on this one, but I just wanted to point out that one of the other benefits of like running on Databricks is that you can run things like in parallel. So like everything you do in Databricks is going to be like on a cluster, right? So even if it's a single node cluster, but you can also scale up and say like, if you did have a model that you say wanted to split and just run against, let's say, multiple different geos or multiple different BUs, then one of the advantages of running on Databricks is you can, like, with basically like just a couple lines of code, say, okay, here's these 50 different subsets of my data. I want to train an individual model on each of those. Then it's just like a couple lines of code to run that in parallel across a cluster. So that can be a big win if you're coming from like just a single notebook type of environment, that a lot of people have found useful. And then not only that, but like when you're like a market analyst specialist or any kind of data scientist running on Databricks, you don't just have the power of even just one cluster, right? You can run multiple clusters, and a lot of times I will see like multiple clusters running in a single pipeline. You may have like one cluster that's sort of optimized for like running that upstream, large scale data processing stuff. Maybe you need a larger cluster because it's like a large data set that you're aggregating down into that weekly data set. And then another cluster that can be just like a small single node cluster to actually run your MMM model. So Databricks sort of gives you the flexibility to like shape your cluster and your compute needs to the particular task. And you're not limited to just like one compute modality. Makes it really easy to switch like between different sorts of compute needs, including like, GPUs. So like if you wanted to try running like an MMM model on a GPU, then you can just have like another cluster that's GPU enabled and run it on that. For this slide, I'm going to hand it over to Will because he's done a ton of great work on integrating Databricks with and PyMC-Marketing with MLFlow and enabling like auto logging. So Will?
Yeah, sure. Let me take over and I'll give you guys a quick taste into the rapid development that we have. You should see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, so I'll first say that we have all of our documentation for PyMC marketing at pymcmarketing.io. In the API, we have a MLflow submodule. This has all of the latest features. It's rapidly developing, but what is currently here is summarized here. It's very verbose, but when we're going into the MMM world, we have our API for PyMC-Marketing in general. But as was mentioned, we have this auto logging functionality that kind of is the lazy man's version of doing this, and we can just use an sklearn like API to work with the MMM. And we aim to not replace MLflow or do everything for you. We want to just inspire you to do what you want. So of course you can interact with the figures and plots, save off anything that is really useful to you. And then I have a repo over here, which will be referenced and linked, where I have some concrete code examples using this, and this has the server. So I ran this right
And
now.
Will, just to clarify, this so far is without Databricks, right? This is like if you want to just manually run MLflow on whatever, like you could, but so far that's not required.
Correct. Yeah, this is just the open source package, PyMC-Marketing. And then this module is some example runs. And I have currently running a server for MLflow locally. And then I have a running these scripts. And I can see that I have this interface for MLflow. And these are just example logs that we get basically for free with the PyMC-Marketing repo. These are some MMM runs that are quite similar to what is doing here with some additional saving stuff. But we, just to give a taste, we save off a lot of information, just derived from the model itself, help you do some of the bookkeeping that you may not want to do manually, such as logging off the control columns, do some of the logging off the channels so you can always come back and see what was the exact context for my model that I was running. And then if it's important to you, look into some metrics for, say, in sample and out of sample prediction. And then we have a handful of artifacts that we easily make accessible. For instance, the whole MLflow model, so you can load this in. We have the binary object for the inference data, which is what we can then reload and then do interesting things like budget optimization, out of sample prediction, anything you'd want. And then just to be um, for this specific run, I logged off some of the saturation functions just so I could go back and reference what exactly was the internals happening, and so forth. But all this is happening in the PyMC. This is live in PyMC Marketing now, and just to kind of reference, we have a lot of development. These are our open tickets, and we have some discussion elements here as well. So just to give a little taste. I'll hand it back to you, Corey.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited about all that stuff. I think it really helps people whenever they have like that auto logging capability there, like you mentioned, to inspire them for, hey, here's all this stuff that I can log. That's important in general, but then like whenever I was mentioning like this parallel training and that sort of thing, or like if you're running on like a schedule, that's a key part of productionization, right? Like you're not going to be sitting there in front of all these different runs that are happening on the cluster. So you need a place to store like all those different plots, the resulting artifacts that come out of the model, whatever particular configuration you were running with the model. Like, where do you store all that stuff? Well, the answer is MLflow. And yeah, running it on Databricks is basically the same. I'll show that a little in the demo as running it if you're running MLflow outside of Databricks. It's just the nice thing is like it's hosted for you on like a production grade server at that point. So getting into like, what does productionization look like? So like Databricks philosophy around everything ML is that ML is fundamentally like a data-centric problem. Like the way that you train models, including like MMM models, it's data in, right? So like what does all your spend look like? What does your revenue look like? And all the aggregates that feed that sort of thing. Same for like your control variables, all that stuff. So it's data problem coming in, and then like what does it produce, right? So like your posterior predictive, like all the summary tables that you get out of this thing, all your traces, it's data coming out, right? So like you've got a model in the middle, and the model is like a critical step, but it's data like all around it. So that's sort of like the way we approach ML on Databricks. So like what does it look like then to actually run like ML ops on a data-centric ML platform? Well, we kind of think of it in three main buckets. One is like, well, you've got to like manage all your data pipelines. So we call that data ops. That's where like Delta Lake and the rest of that platform comes from. And then you've got your model ops. So like as you're making changes to your PyMC marketing model, how do you track like versions of that model and all the configuration that drives that model and keep all that stuff organized, especially like as you scale up to like larger team sizes, right? That's where MLflow helps. And then DevOps is very much a part of all of this too. So like both managing your model producing code, but then also managing the data ETL pipelines that go along with that and produce it. And then all the downstream like dashboards and stuff, you have to keep all that stuff in sync. And then also the infrastructure that goes along with it. Best practice in MMM is same as best practice anywhere else. You want to use infrastructure as code for stuff like that. So a big part of like productionization is being able to like manage all those different assets that you're going to need to create, like those even like the experiment object that you were showing, Will, right? You want to be able to treat that as infrastructure as code. All the jobs that you would want to run with this, you want to be able to treat that as infrastructure as code. So it's really the combination of those three things that you need in order to be successful with ML ops. So this is where a lot of customers that I talk to who are doing MMM, especially if they're um, you know, coming from like a more just like data science on like a local laptop sort of thing, helping them get to that next level with productionization. This is sort of like the starting point, right? You want to break your pipeline down into like bronze, silver, gold, and then have like a proper DE pipeline for your data ops. You want to have like your code for your model development, um, refactored into packages and stored in version control, and keep that in sync with like any changes that you're making from a data perspective, and then keep all that in sync with like code that's in version control for producing like those downstream dashboards and reports. So I won't dive into too much detail on this one, but basically, like the story here is you also want to be thinking about, especially as you get more sophisticated, um, with your MLOps practices, you want to start to think about like segregating environments, right? That doesn't necessarily need to be like separate workspaces as is depicted here, although that is probably what I would consider as best practice. You can just have like separate artifacts within like a single workspace if that's where you're sort of starting from. But the main idea is you want to have like your data scientists and any other marketing specialists who are working on these models to have the flexibility to like experiment with things safely without worry that they're going to like break something into production, right? So having that separate development sort of environment for people to work on is important. And then likewise, you want to have that separate production environment that's going to be like the main thing that's driving results for all your downstream stakeholders. So like your marketing partners and other business partners who are relying on all these reports that you're going to be producing, you want them to have like an environment that they can trust, right? Like they're probably going to be looking at these reports, and this is common, like not even within just MMM, but like pretty much all models. They're going to have like important downstream customers, and if it's a valuable model, people are going to become very reliant on it, and you're going to get a lot of like angry tickets if they come in the morning, they're expecting to see like their latest marketing results, and it's like not there. They're not going to be happy, right? So you want to have like a stable environment that's consistently updating these models that people aren't breaking just because they wanted to try some experiment. And then towards that end, right, the same way that you want reliability in production as it's just running day to day, you also want this connective tissue between development and production to also help shield those users, all your downstream processes from like any changes that you're making. So you definitely still want to incorporate all those best practices from software engineering around like unit testing and integration tests, build those into your data pipeline or into your DevOps pipeline, and that sort of stuff. And that's where like, piggybacking off of like PyMC-Marketing, which already has like sophisticated tests and stuff, that gets you like a huge chunk of the way there, right? If you're not having to like write all this code that's doing all that stuff that Will was just talking about, that's already done for you and it's already tested, right? So like your tests don't have to do all that stuff if you write on something like PyMC-Marketing. And further take that as inspiration for like how can I set up, like if I do want to make it like a custom model or whatever, the way I would recommend to do that is follow the great example that's already there in PyMC-Marketing code, right? Just take a look at the code and use that as like a starting point. A little bit about Databricks asset bundles. I won't spend too much time on it, but I just wanted to point out that like when you're working with Databricks, we do have like an infrastructure as code sort of capability. It's called Databricks Asset Bundle. So what it basically does is gets you like the ability to say, hey, I want to have like a job as a resource, and you just define it as code. So here's my job, and that job can be something like, update my MMM model. So run MMM inference on this particular like subset of my data. So you define that as a job, and then whenever you run Databricks bundle deploy, that's going to actually create that job if it's missing or update it if it's already there. Same for like your experiment objects. So you can basically just define your experiment object as a resource and it will do the whole infrastructure as code thing and say, hey, I need to make sure that this experiment object exists because there's going to be some job that's like, pushing runs into it. So you can run it from your development environment. So like, your dev loop can incorporate Databricks asset bundles, but then also here's the key thing, right? You can also use it as part of those transitions between those different environments that we were talking about. So whenever you move from dev to staging or dev to staging to prod, what does that look like? right? So the way you want that to look is it's just coming through your version control, right? So whenever your data scientist has like an update to their MMM model, or your data engineers has an update to one of those upstream data pipelines, all they do is a pull request. So it just moves in source control. And then the source control will basically trigger, the same for any other DevOps process, right? It triggers that CI/CD process to actually run that Databricks bundle command set. And then that's what will update those objects and get that code moving. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, just because I think it's a huge part of the problem, right? And it's pretty easy to like understate this if you're not painfully familiar with it, right? So, um, like the big challenge in productionization beyond the things that we've talked about so far, like it's it's pretty straightforward. Like once you work through the documentation to get all this stuff set up. Where it still becomes difficult is like reality sets in, right? You're going to have things that happen like upstream to your data sources that are like, going to effectively break your model. And ideally, whenever it breaks, you would like, like the good case is like whenever it breaks and then like your pipeline actually fails, right? So like if something happens that's going to like make your inference wrong, you want to know about it, right? You don't want to just be making bad business decisions based on bad data, right? The challenge is like a lot of times the problems aren't that obvious, right? So like you can end up like if you change a code for one of your channels or like your accounts or whatever, then you can end up like flatlining one of your spend levels. And your model may be just thinking, oh, well, I'm not having any spend on this thing, right? Right? But no, that's actually not what happened. You just have like some kind of upstream breakage in your pipeline that's silent. So where Lakehouse Monitoring steps in is like helping you like make those visible again, right? You want to be aware of like if you have some feature, including like spin levels or any of your control variables or anything like that, anything that breaks, anytime you have like a distribution shift on that stuff, you want to be able to become aware of it. And so Lakehouse Monitoring is a great new feature in Databricks that basically lets you say, okay, I have this Delta table. I want to go in and monitor it. So it's like one click. You can have like a complete monitoring pipeline set up on not just your inference results tables, but also like any other table that you're pulling in. And then the last main feature that I wanted to point out, I don't have time to go through all the Databricks features, but like the main thing is like this Unity catalog. So like all those tables that we were talking about, like how do you securely get access to all the people who need access to it? Um, and how do you track like all the models, like the specific versions of the models that go along with those tables over time and the lineage among those? So Unity Catalog is like the main feature that's in Databricks that helps with that. So yeah, I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about like some of the assets that are out there. So this is the example. I believe this is close to the example that Will was pulling up earlier. I know it's derived from one of Will's examples, but just showing like what it looks like to run MLflow on Databricks. So like I mentioned, it's built into the platform. So like you don't have to set up a separate MLflow instance whenever you're working with MLflow on Databricks. You basically just import MLflow and then do start run. And the nice thing about running MMM on Databricks is that MLflow is already integrated into your notebook. So like if you just open up a notebook, and this isn't even doing model training. This is just showing like the simplest possible example. Will had an example of how you would do that on MLflow locally. Here's what that same sort of thing would look like running on Databricks. You just start run and then start logging stuff, right? And whenever you do that, um, there's actually integration in the UI here where you can see like all the experiment runs, and then you just click on it, and that same UI that Will was showing on like a local MLflow, it's the same UI like within Databricks. So this is like the hosted MLflow with like a production grade database behind it, artifact tracking that's already integrated with your cloud storage. So like you don't even have to do anything else. Like you just start logging stuff and there it is, right? To make it even easier, like the stuff that Will's done to like get auto logging in there, like this is just, I believe this example will just had like auto logging running for like any PyMC model, using the PyMC marketing auto log capability. And yeah, you basically just start running inference, and then you'll automatically get like all the stuff that Will was highlighting earlier. And then this is the one that I really wanted to focus a little more on. This is like running a PyMC marketing model. So this is pulling that MMM example data set. And then like this is how easy it is to set up a MMM model with PyMC marketing. Like it builds a sophisticated Bayesian MMM model for you just by specifying this small set of configuration. And then whenever you do the fit, you're going to automatically get all that stuff logged that Will was showing earlier. And if you're doing it on Databricks, you don't have to set anything else up, like it's automatically logged. You can either log it to the experiment that's attached to the notebook, or you can create like a separate experiment object. So like if you want to do like another experiment object, you can just go create MLflow experiment and call it, my MMM model or whatever, hit create, and then now you have a new experiment object that you can log stuff into. And it's as easy as just calling set experiment to do that. I did want to touch on the solution accelerator, even though it's not updated yet to use PyMC marketing, will be hopefully soon. But the main thing that I wanted to highlight here is like, even if you're doing like a custom model, right, your notebook, you can still like integrate and refactor all your code into like a nice set of packages or whatever that does your actual modeling. You can either do it directly on PyMC like this is doing, or ideally start from PyMC marketing as like a starting point, right? That's going to be the best way to get up and running quickly. The thing that I wanted to highlight here is starting to show like what that gold table looks like. So the example here is sort of derived from like a 5-trillion table that we were using internally at one point for some of this stuff. And this is what the gold table would look like. But upstream from all this stuff, you're going to have like um, all the other tables that are driving this. So like Unity catalog comes in here, and you would have like here's that 5-trillion table that I was looking at. You would be able to go into like this lineage table. I don't think I have like the example working here, but like you'd be able to click on this lineage and see upstream like what actually created this table. It's typically going to be coming from some other table, um, like your upstream spin tables that you're getting from the APIs or that you're ingesting from your out-of-home advertising partners, that sort of thing. And then like you have one set of code that's actually producing all these tables and moving data around for that, and then a separate job that can again be refactored. Like whenever we say you can do jobs on Databricks using notebooks, we don't mean that like all your code would be in the notebook and that you shouldn't refactor anything into packages. No, you should definitely still refactor stuff into nice packages and so forth. And the accelerator gives kind of an example of what that could look like. But then your MMM inference notebook would basically just pull in that table and then run inference on that model, right? And even though like well, actually, before I go there, one of the things that you can log is like the configuration of the model at that time. So like not only be able to pull in, like Will was talking about, pull in that original I data, you also want to be able to pull in, and I think PyMC Marketing already has some great functionality around this. Like you want to be able to fully reconstitute that model, including like all the configuration, all the priors that were used, all that stuff. So that's another thing that I would recommend doing for productionizing these models. It's really easy to forget, like, okay, how did I actually create that model? And then the last thing that I want to point out is that like all the other examples that PyMC Marketing has, like this is an example of the main MMM notebook, all that stuff works fine on Databricks. There's one or two gotchas that I'll talk about here, like as I'm wrapping up. Installing GraphViz, so like getting that graph integration that PyMC Marketing has working is a little different on Databricks. So you basically have to just install the underlying GraphViz package for Python, and then also do like just a little init script to install the Ubuntu package that GraphViz needs to run. And then whenever you actually run the thing, you just like it doesn't automatically pick up that that graph as object and display it like Jupyter does. You just have to wrap it in this little display HTML call and call this representation call yourself. But the main point here is that like all this stuff works. So like all the great work that PyMC marketing team and community have put together for like examples of how to do MMM, that's the same examples that I would use for running on Databricks anyway, with some of the other stuff that I've mentioned. So like, this is a great starting point, but then for productionizing it, you want to like refactor some of this stuff, put it into like infrastructure as code via dabs, schedule the job, and then set up those multiple environments. And yeah, that's basically what I wanted to get through. So I know we would like to leave time for questions on this stuff, so I'll stop there and hand it back over to Thomas.
Great. Thanks a lot. Yeah, this was really great to see. And I just love how this comes together in terms of like the open source and then partnering with you guys and still delivering on like the whole production workflow. So thanks for everyone for sticking around. We have some questions, and if you have one, you can just use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen and then type it there, and then we'll get to it. So the first question is from Francois. How long does it usually take to set up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the MMM part itself, we're actually just getting started with PyMC marketing on Databricks. It's like just a couple of minutes. I mean, you literally download the notebook, spin up a cluster, and run it. For doing your data pipelines, it can be involved. So like getting any particular aspect of the pipeline up and running, once you have like all the connections made to your upstream data source, that typically goes pretty fast. Like it's easy to ingest data like once you have it running. But actually going through all the processes of like establishing those connections, getting the credentials that you need. Typically you're working with multiple teams in your org. Like you may not have access as a data scientist to the account that's actually hosting your Facebook API, right? So working through all that process does take some time. I'm not gonna like wager a guess on like how long that takes for any particular organization. But I do want to leave you with like the sort of like I guess right expectation, right? I mean like setting up all those upstream pipelines that I was talking about for like establishing those data flows, that is going to take some level of investment. And that's probably the most time consuming part is just getting the data right. Like establishing the pipeline and going through the process of validating the data with all your stakeholders, making sure that you have high level of quality. That's probably the hard part. The downstream stuff of like, setting up Databricks asset bundles, that's really straightforward. I mean, that's like maybe an hour or two to set that up. We make that pretty easy.
Yeah, we definitely know the same in our client projects where we develop custom MMMs that exceed what PyMC marketing can do and customize them. And definitely the data quality and just how to normalize and all of that takes a lot of time to get right. And yeah, it can be quite an obstacle. We'll definitely can attest to that.
The other thing I would
Um,
add there is setting up an MMM model without PyMC marketing can be a challenge, right? So like whenever I was first setting up that current solution accelerator, it took a long time for me. Like I'm just going to be completely transparent. It took a long time for me to figure out like, okay, why is this Bayesian model like, why am I not able to like reproduce the parameters that I put into this thing? It takes time to debug all that stuff. So like I'm not kidding when I say PyMC marketing is like a huge accelerator for that stuff. It's at least for me non-trivial to like set that stuff up. So PyMC marketing is a huge accelerator for that. And then also like if you want to extend beyond that, so like one of the things that I've been working on with Thomas and Will and the team there is like I want to do like something custom with like geospatial sort of modeling. And that sort of extension, that can also be difficult. And it can take a long time to get that stuff right. and work through all that stuff. So I did want to also mention like the thing that I'm excited about with the partnership isn't just like PyMC marketing part. It's also like having PyMC labs behind PyMC marketing. Like it's usually valuable for companies to be able to have someone to turn to. Like, hey, we have this business situation. We know what we want to do with this model. We just don't know how to actually create like a custom model. So having someone, both the community and the consulting arm, that's usually valuable. Like, right, you just want to get your model up and running and have it like working. So like the more you can accelerate that and get through those iterations, yeah, that's like one of the main things for accelerating it. Like it's it's humbling for me, like as a data scientist, for how long some of this stuff can take to get up and running. And from talking to like other customers and companies, that's not uncommon, right? It's hard to get this stuff working sometimes.
Mm. Yeah. It definitely is. And one thing actually just you reminded me of is so while we do the custom models, we also have a coaching type offering where you still are in the driver's seat and build your model, and that can be on Databricks or outside of Databricks, but have people like Will that have developed the software on call to like ask questions and get help with. So there's like different paths. Another question from Michael: how often would you run the MMM inference? Could it be fully automated? And how would you analyze the snapshot results in real time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I've seen a lot of variance in how often people run it. I don't see too many people running it daily. Usually it's going to be weekly. Most often I've seen is like monthly. Like typically, like a typical data science team that I would talk to, like they're trying to set up like a monthly cadence with their marketing partners. It'll be at a weekly granularity, but they're typically looking to get like a monthly sort of run. And then like once they run the thing, they'll typically have that set up with like, some sort of visualization front end. So like whatever the results are that they're going to be pushing out of the model, it's typically going to look like what I was showing. They're trying to push that into some sort of like production serving gold table as a result of the model that they're wanting to share with like their downstream partners. And that can either be in like a real-time served sort of production dashboard. So like, your typical Power BI or whatever, ideally, whatever you're using like within your org for your other visualizations, you would just point that at like Databricks SQL and say, hey, I want to serve this table, which represents my model outputs, to the rest of my org. And that way you can integrate with like the rest of what people are already using. Like you don't want like your MMM stuff to be separate from all the other analytics that they're going to be looking at, right? You want to have it integrated with the rest of the analytics. Um, so yeah, I would say like probably weekly or monthly is going to be the most common. And yeah, it was typically going to be like a real-time serving on the model results type of thing. Yeah.
And then those snapshots of those different runs, is there an easy way to compare them?
Yeah, so typically like and this is like the same approach that we use within Lakehouse Monitoring. We would typically just give it like sort of a grouping column that says like here's the run. So some sort of a tag. And then yeah, you can just select multiple models from that tag, show them on the same visualization and say like here's A versus B type of thing, right? Here's my first run, my second run, all that sort of grouping functionality is built into Lakehouse Monitoring. And yeah, that's the same approach I would use for stuff that isn't sort of like in Lakehouse Monitoring. So like any dashboards can use that same sort of approach.
Next question is from Ryan, which I think is probably a related answer. I have a history of MMMs, and once the data flows are established, you go to run MMM. There are typically multiple models that the MMM produces that you can choose from. Does PyMC MMM produce multiple models, and how do you go about seeing the multiple results and choosing what to use? So actually, one thing that I want to make sure, so there is, for example, the Robin package, which like if you run it once, it like creates a whole army of models and then chooses one from there. And part of the reason is that it's using a fitting procedure that is where you can get multiple results that give you a similar fit, and then you have to find other criteria to choose, right? PyMC-Marketing, there's only going to be a single fit. That's the best one, and this is a big benefit of being in the Bayesian framework here. Now, there's a different way to understand that question where it's like, well, maybe you want to run different configurations of that model, right? And that is a totally fair thing to do. And yeah, so how in that scenario would Databricks help with that?
Yeah, so that kind of gets to the thing that we were looking at earlier with like multiple different runs, right? So like every time you do a run and have like a different configuration, or like you try sort of like a different prior or whatever, and you want to see like, hey, am I, you know, is my model like overly sensitive to my priors, that sort of thing? Yeah, you would just log that different things to MLflow. And then the nice thing about MLflow, not only do you have like the UI, but we also make it really easy to get access to all that data programmatically. So you can hit the API to like pull it in just via the normal Python API, or you can like select that stuff via like a Spark interface. So you can just say like, give me a data frame of all these results from those models. So it makes it pretty easy to do stuff like that. Including like, you know, if you want to, if there's something that's in that iData, you know, netcdf file that you're logging, you can write scripts that run over that and pull each of those artifacts, load them up, do some analysis over it. Also, like that's I think also relevant to the comment around like whenever you're pushing out those like posterior predictives or forecasts or whatever, putting tags on it. So like whenever you log the model to the experiment, you're getting like a run ID. There's another thing though that like the model registry concept in MLflow and that like Unity Catalog functions as a model registry. So like whenever you log the thing, you'll be logging it to an experiment. Whenever you register it, you're going to register it to like a registered model entity in Unity Catalog, and you can refer to that and the version that you have whenever you're writing out those production tables. So like whenever you write out your forecast or whenever you write out like your budget optimizer results, right? You can actually include the model that it came from, right? So then if you have like a champion challenger type of thing, you can put those as aliases, same way that you would do for like a normal predictive model, and then log like which alias it was using or the version alongside it, and then compare that way if you're looking at the downstream artifacts. Yeah, great question.
Then we have a question from Leonard for Will. According to your experience, what would be the biggest bottleneck point of attention to anticipate when developing an MMM project?
I think it's overall like a very business heavy problem. So I think for PyMC-Marketing provides a lot of conveniences where we have these model components, the ad stock, the saturation, all tried and true, tested and ready for you to either use through the MMM API or the custom models. But there's a lot of discussions that happen kind of with business stakeholders to make sure that the data coming in is pristine, and then the model outputs are also pristine. So I think there's always going to be a lot of conversation there. So
Yeah.
that's my experience.
And if you need help navigating all that and either have an existing MMM implementation that you're running but want to improve it, or you don't have one but want to set one up, definitely reach out to us. We're there to help, and you can email us at info@pymclabs.com. And yeah, we'd love to just hear from you what your experiences have been. So with that, we're at time. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and especially thanks to Corey and Will for the amazing presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Really happy to be able to talk to you a little bit about this today. Thanks, Thomas. Will.
Thanks, guys. Everyone have a good one.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.